Fighting against PPPs and the privatization policies that the UN is not only promoting inside its structures, but also outside. Public Services International represents 20 million working women and men who deliver vital public services in more than 160 countries, and we champion human rights, advocate for social justice, and promote universal access to quality public services. And we work with the United Nations system and in partnership with labor, civil society, and other organizations.
But the financial and economic crisis after 2008 pushed even more the aggression of capital over workers and over the possibility to influence government to open market that once was protected and destined to public services. So after the strong relocation of manufacturing industries, the new market to open is now the market of public services, and this is why many governments decided to endorse this ideological approach that the private capital is far better than the public management of public services.
So where did this idea come from? As Rosa mentioned, it had its genesis in the United Kingdom. The idea of concessions is very old, that the government will provide monopoly rights to a private company, and the private company recoups those its investment through charging those services. But PPPs are a little bit different, and what we saw in the 90s when we started having these public finance rules that were coming in all over the world is that governments were looking for ways to get debt off their books. And so Margaret Thatcher essentially, and under her government, essentially created an accounting trick. So what do? They basically grant long-term contractual rights, typically 20 to 30 years, to a firm with a guaranteed revenue flow, and they typically bundle the provision of those services. So
and last year in the United States, Wall Street put a price tag on AFSCME members and the services that our members provide. We represent 1.7 million workers across the United States and Puerto Rico. They also put a price tag on the assets that taxpayers pay into, our roads, our bridges, our schools, our buildings, our state capitals, and that price tag is $6 trillion. So $6 trillion in the United States is up for grabs. In 2008, December 2008, at the height of the recession hitting and sweeping across this world, the city of Chicago, Mayor Daley, the last thing he wanted to do was set a precedent of leaving his city in financial shambles. So here comes a bank, Morgan Stanley, and says, for your 36,000 parking meters across the city of Chicago, here's $1.2 billion. Saves the day, right? And Morgan Stanley paid the $1.2 billion for 36,000 parking meters for a term of 75 years. So you think that's bad? It gets worse. By November, a year later, less than a year later, Morgan Stanley was making $1.1 million a week off of the profits of parking meters across the city of Chicago. By December, a year later, December 31st, the city, out of that $1.2 billion, a year later, guess how much they had left out of that $1.2 billion? $180 million.
And what we're seeing today is that the role of private actors is transcending just privatization. And we're seeing this through financialization. And this is happening through institutional investors, private investors, transnational corporations, and regular private firms. And it's also happening through legal and policy-making arenas. So it's not just projects like PPPs, but it's also happening through the locking in of legal power, particularly through the investor-state dispute settlement clause and bilateral investment treaties and free trade agreements, and I will refer to that in just a second. But to come back to this era of financialization, right? PPPs is a part of the financialization, especially in infrastructure.